Hi guys, and welcome to this week's video. We're going to be looking at the big questions that youth and young people have asked, and we're going to be hearing answers and responses from youth workers and former youth workers from all around the world. And we're going to hear some of those questions and answers now.
Why should we trust the church when it made so many mistakes?
I don't think we should put our trust in church, because church is going to let us down. Church is people, and people are not perfect, very imperfect, and we will let each other down. Ultimately, we are full of the stuff that the Bible calls sin, and we will let people down. And so when we put our trust in other people, then we will be let down. But if we put our trust in God, we will never be let down. And that's the thing, is recognizing what part of church is people and what part of church is God. Because we can easily let in human behavior into church, and we can teach people that that is church. But ultimately, church is a group of people following God, and that's what we want to do.
Well, the thing is, it depends on our understanding of what the church is. Is the church just a building down the road? Or is it something more? Is the church just a landmark on a corner, or just a really old building, or maybe a newer building? Well, I want to encourage you that the church is not just a building. In fact, the church is the people. I love the story that we find in Acts 2 in the New Testament part of the Bible, where we see the birth of the church. This guy Peter does a talk, and many people choose to connect with Jesus that day. And it begins the beginnings of the church. But they're not known as the church initially. They're known as the way, because of the way they live, the way they deal with injustice, the way they support each other, the way they talk to each other, the way they treat people of all faiths and no faith. That actually the church is seen as a new way of living. This radical way of living for Jesus, of acting humbly, acting justly, loving mercy, and walking humbly with Him. You see, Jesus invites us to a new way of living, and He invites us into this family, this community called the church. And so we get to be part of that. Maybe you're not part of a church, or you don't feel like you're part of a local church community connecting to that. Well, you can be. You get to be part of one. But can I encourage you that the church is a group of people, and therefore, if it's this family, this group of people, the church is people, what do people do? We make mistakes, we get stuff wrong. So actually, that's the kind of the beauty, but also the thing about church. It's full of people like you and me who make mistakes, get things wrong. So actually, yes, the church has made mistakes historically, but that's because it's a group of humans. But thankfully, Jesus is the leader of the church. He's the one who leads and guides, and we want to become more like Him. So yes, there has been mistakes historically with the church, but the future is bright because it's full of people like you and me who get to be part of it, following Jesus's way of living and learning more and more of how to do that, learning from the past mistakes and living for the future that God has for us.
Now this one's a really tough one because it's kind of a loaded question. Like, if you look at what the church has done in the past, they've done some really, really atrocious things. So I'm from Canada, and in Canada, in our own history, the church is responsible for some really, really atrocious things that have happened to our Indigenous population. And so what I've kind of noticed from them is I've noticed that they've taken accountability for their actions. So they're like, yes, we acknowledge we did this, and we're going to try to fix it. And it's really neat because it's these specific churches that caused this harm are the ones that are now leading in these reconciliation movements. So they're the ones that are leading when other churches that maybe weren't involved in this injustice are maybe kind of a little bit farther behind them. But I've seen that they're making those very conscious actions to fix the harm that was done. And it's kind of just like with any other person. So how do you figure out if you're going to trust someone if you've been hurt by them in the past? You're going to kind of be a little bit cautious of them at first and see if their actions are actually changing. And so with that, you kind of can see, okay, what are they motivated by? Are they motivated by love? Are they motivated by bettering themselves? Are they trying to be better than they were yesterday and be better tomorrow than they are today? Is that their action, or are they motivated by just trying to be comfortable and make things easy for themselves? And so you can kind of do that with the church as well. You can see, okay, they did all these atrocious things in the past, and I'm pretty sure they're doing atrocious things now, and we just don't even know it. So what are we going to do when we realize that? And I think looking at the trend around us, that there's been increasingly better accountability, or like acceptance of what we're doing. And I've seen a lot of people, even when you're looking at like the Black Lives Matter movements, seeing that churches, not all churches, sometimes things take a while to get some traction, are starting to take responsibility and look and be like, okay, we see how we're part of this. How can we fix it? So that's been really neat. But I think what's really important, and it's a good blanket statement for everything, it's important to have critical thinking. So it's never good just to blindly follow anybody, but to use that whole brain that God gave you and your smarts, and ask people you trust and you love, and ask people that have got the like your best in heart, see what they think as well. So it could be asking people like Simon, like you don't know me, but Simon, you know that he's going to be caring for you and he's got your best interests in heart. So kind of asking those people around you, but also you've got your own brain. So I know that there are some things that I might view a little bit differently than Simon, but that's because I've got a different brain than him. That my brain maybe critically thinks a little bit different than any of yours. And that's kind of what's neat, is we've been given this ability to be able to think for ourselves. So God hasn't told us everything, this is how it has to be, very square boxes, but there's a lot of freedom in it too. And so he's given you the ability to choose. So choose to follow him or not. And so in that, he's given you a head to be able to, or a brain, not just a head that is full of a brain, to think about that as well.
Why should we trust anyone who does mistakes, right? It doesn't work that way, does it? Right? If you distrusted every person who made a mistake, you would rid your life of all your friends, right? I mean, church consists of people, and people make mistakes, unfortunately. But unlike other people in the world, church representatives more often acknowledge those mistakes. They more often apologize. And church in general more often recognizes them. Bible says you should put your trust in God, not in church anyways. So we don't put our trust in church or any other man, because they make mistakes and our task is to forgive them. Or if we make a mistake, it is to reconcile and to repent. The church functions as a place of fellowship, so that those all people who make mistakes can gather together, can forgive each other, can love each other, and reconcile and repent before each other and before God.
I think that is a really good question. I mean, just in light of all these wars and things that happened in the past, where the church actually didn't show itself from the best side, I totally agree with you that this question is totally valid. I mean, Dalai Lama, he said it like this, and I don't know if you know this quote, but he said, "I really like your Christ, but I don't like your Christians, because your Christians are so unlike your Christ." And I mean, maybe that's what we realize or experience nowadays even as well often, where we realize that, we ourselves, or sometimes Christians around us, don't necessarily behave how Jesus would do, I think I realize often that we focus far too much on ourselves, and where actually it's not about ourselves, where when we look at history, we look at Christians, and when we think about faith, we automatically think, okay, well, then look at the Christians and then you know what Jesus is about. But as we can see, that's not always the case. You know, what Christians do doesn't automatically mean that that's what Jesus would do, or that's what the faith is about, that this is what it says about in the Bible. I mean, ideally, it obviously would be like that, and I hope that in our lives it can be every single day more and more like that. But the sad truth is that, to be honest, often living as a Christian is hard, just simply because the standards are so high, and that's not a bad thing. But I think what we have to realize is that we ourselves need to point far more to Jesus than to ourselves, so that this misconception won't happen to people, that people won't think, okay, well, these Christians, they are about themselves, so I don't really like that Christianity. But when we are this signpost that points to Jesus, I hope that the people around us will realize that it's not about us Christians and what we do, but that it's about what Jesus did and what he did for us, and that the values that Jesus stands for, what it says in the Bible, that this is what Christianity is about, and not primarily what Christians do. As I said in the beginning, I think, and it often says that, right? A lot of people quote, we as Christians, we will be known by our deeds, but we also have to make sure that this is not the primary thing, what we are about as Christians. If we are just about our deeds and how good we are and what good things we do, then it's about us and not about Jesus anymore. So let's get the focus right. And interestingly, I think when we think about the bad that happened in history, we also have to think about all the good things that the church was involved in or is responsible for in the past.
What positive impact has the church had in history?
I'm pretty sure for every mistake you've seen in history by the church that you can also find something good. So when I lived in London, I was part of a church down there called Holy Trinity Clapham, and there was this group of people, and they were absolutely instrumental in ending the slave trade. And so when you read their stories, a big thing was that they were motivated by their faith, that they fought, they worked in politics, they worked in their careers that they were given, the careers that they worked hard in to get educated and to be part of. And they used those platforms to be able to fight for justice and be able to end this slave trade. It took a long time, but that's one of the really cool things that happens. But I think one of the neatest things about the church is there are these big things that they do that are really good, but a lot of the church is about these small things happening time and time again. So it's just like if you look at like a raindrop on a piece of rock. It doesn't seem like it's doing much, but over time that's going to erode it away. So even the Grand Canyon, that exists because water ran through it, and it just takes a long time. But it makes a big difference. And I think the church can be like this too. There was a quote I heard recently that was talking about the power of like how good things take a long time. So thinking about a garden, in order to have a good garden, you have to water it every day and weed it. But a lot of these good things happen that way. So it's things like Simon showing up for you every day, or every day, every week, all the time. He's there for you. So these things might not get published in the newspaper, but that's good work. So like I know for myself, I had youth leaders that cared about me, that allowed me to ask questions and kind of figure out my faith. And I have had leaders and friends and mentors that have all poured into me. And that's never going to make the newspaper, but then that impact ripples out and I'm able to impact other people in my work and my personal life. And then they're able to impact more people. And so these small ripples start to make a big change. And so there's a lot of really big things that I'm sure you can learn about, but I think I don't want you to forget about these small things that affect the everyday person too.
The church has had a really big impact, I think, positively. When you look back, lots of churches started schools and hospitals and funded them, and it was Christians that decided that actually, wait a second, people should have access to healthcare, should have access to education, and they provided it. And when we look in history, there are specific people that made a huge difference that were Christians. So William Wilberforce, he was one of the leaders in abolishing the slave trade, and he was a Christian. And he did that because of his beliefs. Martin Luther King, wow, what a guy. He was a leader in the civil rights movement, and what he did has massively changed our society and will continue to. He was a Christian. There are so many Christians that have started positive change in our society. And there's so many Christians that have made a difference, individually and in groups. When there's natural disasters across the world, Christians are often the people that send aid to those countries. And I think that's incredible that throughout many, many years we can see, there's loads of other things we could mention, but we can see how Christians have made an impact because of their beliefs.
You may not believe, but the church for a long time has been a center of scholarship and science. We know that because it was the monastic orders or monastic centers that popularized and collected and translated the great works of ancient philosophers, for instance, or books of ancient literature. They collected them together and kept them in monasteries. Monasteries also used to be centers of art at some point. Most prominent scientists and scholars like Pascal, like Newton, like Maxwell, Faraday, they were all Christians, sons and daughters and offsprings of Lutheran pastors, of all kinds of from Anglican Church or Calvinist church members. I encourage you to dig deeper, and you'll see the immense good impact of the church on culture, architecture, philosophical thought, and science in particular.
It's great that you asked this question. I think not all these bad things that we hear about so often, or the wars and the battles that the church is sadly responsible for, that we shouldn't also just focus on these things, but especially in our Western world, what Christianity is known for and responsible for. There are so many things. If you think about how our Western life works, that's very much focused on not necessarily, but in many points it's focused on how Western societies work. So England, America, Germany, countries like that. If we think about how our core values in our societies, our law, our healthcare system, our hospitals, all these things, how they are based immediately just on Christian values, how over history Christianity has shaped how people treat each other in our countries, how equality and justice matters are based on such a Christian ideology, then I think we realize what a big positive impact the church, Christians had in history. If you think about it, in the 4th century, the church were the people who started hospitals. There were maybe a lot of people who called themselves, who were trying to heal people. Maybe there were magicians and stuff like that as well around. But the church were actually the people who first started to be there for the poor, for the needy, for the ill, for the people who were marginalized, and to provide long-term care in hospitals for people. Just that, all the healthcare aspect really in history really comes from a Christian perspective, that orphans are cared for. The first orphanage was built and founded by a Christian, that we see how just people deal with each other, and as I said before, how our Christian values are based in our constitution, in our law, then I think, man, Christianity did already so much. I think we also have to consider in all this that nowadays where these values are so integrated into our system that when these values become normal, that we realize it's not about just doing those things, but doing them with the right heart and with the right attitude, doing those things for Jesus, not just to be nice to people because it says so in our law, but to love and extend love to our neighbors, to the people around us, because that's what Jesus taught us.
How has persecution impacted the church?
So I think there's two main ways that I've noticed that persecution has impacted the church. One being initially when the church was first forming and Christianity was first a thing. Persecution actually spread it into the world. I'm thinking particularly of Acts 8:1, which I'll read for you, which says, "On that day, a great persecution broke out against the church in Jerusalem, and all except the apostles were scattered throughout Judea and Samaria." So that Judea and Samaria is just the area around Jerusalem, going out in bigger circles. So we can see from history that from that point, if persecution hadn't happened, I don't think the church would have grown as quickly or taken up such a big area, which I think is really fascinating. But another thing about Christianity and persecution is that a lot of areas where Christianity is persecuted, it's actually growing a lot faster than areas where it isn't, which I think is just really cool to see that these people are so confident in their faith and they know that it's true. And so persecution doesn't matter to them. Obviously, it's painful, but in the long term, they know that what they're fighting for is right.
Now, you might be wrong me saying this, but I don't think we face real persecution in comparison to what they used to, and some people still do. We still get bullying, we get people calling us names, we get people that don't understand why we do what we do, why we work for very cheap, or why we do whatever, because they don't understand it. But if you look at the persecuted churches in North Korea, for example, they are one of the fastest growing church and most selfless churches. They're living day to day in God's word, and they're experiencing God in ways that the Western world never will, because that's their life. And I think check out the Open Doors website for more information on that and them and what they're doing. And yeah, I think that they are the prime example. I think our faith is built on persecution. Jesus had to die to then come back, and I think persecution's always been there. But we're fortunate enough nowadays where we don't have to live in a society that we're getting killed for it and things like that. So yeah, I think persecution still exists, and it exists a lot in the Middle Eastern world and around there and that kind of thing. But yeah, I think we do face some in like bullying and mick taking and things like that. But apart from that, I think we're doing all right. But again, it's still not nice when it happens.